Hi, Kinesiology 3010. Today we're going to talk about psychological measurements in sport and exercise. So we're really going to focus on sport and exercise psychology and how we can measure different qualities of human performance and mood, arousal, different things like that. So the focus of sport psychology is to both improve performance or cause performance enhancement, um, and also to improve mental health and mental well-being, because sport is not just all fun and game and performance. There are a lot of mental health concerns when it comes to, especially an elite, highly competitive environment, when injuries come about. So we need to be able to assess these psychological qualities in order to improve our athletes' performance and overall health. Okay, because the mind always affects how our body is functioning. And the way that we think or feel can impact how we perform physically when we're inside of a competition. And then those psychological factors, especially at the highest level, play a huge role in wins and losses, improvements and decrements, and changes within that overall performance. So we want to be able to understand and measure these qualities so that we can create interventions and improve our athletes or our clients or uh, our students or whoever we're working with, improve their performance overall. And we also have to look at this from the mental health standpoint. Especially in today's society, we're more and more concerned with mental health, um, because in that very competitive environment, there are a lot of pressures coming from different points, and even those pressures are trickling down into the younger and less competitive levels are becoming more competitive. We're having these competitive pressures placed on by family, work, coaches. So we want to be able to measure these and understand if our athletes are having troubles, or are they having frustration, depression, anxiety, changes in aggressiveness, because of this competitive sporting environment, and especially at younger ages and into professional or collegiate levels. We can also use this to understand personality in sport performance or in sport participation. So different participants have different personalities depending on the sport. Okay? The personality is the sum of your characteristics, um, that make you unique, and understanding your personality can help us improve you as a student, an athlete, an exerciser, any one of those, and improve your quality, because now we can target our intervention towards what makes you click and what works best for you. And to measure these, we have to use some different psychological measurements or trait measures. These trait theory is goes about understanding someone's human personality, and this trait is a predisposition or a habit behavior uh, that is chronic. It's pretty stable over time, um, and this does differ between individuals, and it causes changes within our behavior. So understanding our traits, these stable behaviors, stable thoughts, stable emotions, can help us better intervene with our athletes. Because they um, aren't often changed based on situation, we can kind of assume that you will follow a certain path based on your trait. And some of the major traits that we're going to look at is extroversion versus introversion, um, and then traits that are more, or thoughts of stability compared to unstable traits. So think of this as outgoing and shy versus consistent and ever changing. Um, so think about these as what kind of personality traits um, are more conducive to different types of athletes. So think about endurance athletes, like long distance runners, long distance cyclists, long distance swimmers. What personality traits might you see more in those endurance athletes or those more individual sport athletes compared to team sport athletes like football, basketball, soccer, where it's a very conducive to interpersonal skills compared to the other, where it's very isolated. Uh, these understanding your athlete's personality traits can better help you as the coach deal with those athletes, and as you're guiding athletes, maybe if you're in a physical education standpoint and you're trying to help your students direct them towards a specific sport, understanding their traits can help you say, hey, you might want to try this sport, or you may be better at this sport. Or if you see that your entire class is very focused around team sport activities, maybe you stay away from more individual, or you give more individual opportunities to those students that maybe show more of those um, introverted traits. So how would we measure these? So one example is the 10-item personality inventory. So you can fill this out as you're following along. Um, you're going to indicate 1 is strongly disagree, 2 is disagree moderately, 3 disagree a little, 4 neither agree nor disagree, 5 agree a little, 6 agree moderately, 7 agree strongly. So we're using this scale, this numeric scale, to identify where along the spectrum you fall based on these questions. Okay, and then you need to rate how these apply to you. And what I want to say first is be honest. Don't try to write what you think I want to hear or what you think someone else may want to hear. Think about this critically and think about yourself and you in different situations. Where do you fall along these? All right, so I see myself as extroverted or enthusiastic. Fill that in. Critical and quarrelsome. Okay, so this is very you like to butt heads. Dependent or dependable and self-disciplined. Anxious and easily upset. Open to new experiences. Reserved or quiet. Sympathetic, warm. Disorganized and careless. Calm and emotionally stable. And conventional, uncreative. Think stable, gotta stick to the same thing all the time. Right, so fill these out. You can pause it, fill them out on your own. All right, and then we're going to understand how to code this or how to read your scores and give us an output that would help us understand who you are or what traits best align with you based on this trait inventory. Okay, so first of all, I want you to recode the reverse scored items. So a few of these are reverse scored. So say if you scored on question 2, if you scored a 7, recode that 7 as a 1. Or if you scored 6, recode it as a 2. So we're flip-flopping the scores. So those that were a higher number are now their opposite low number. Okay, so for example, this is our reverse coding standard, and these are the items. So all of the even items from our TPI, these even ones, I want you to recode. So whatever you scored, I want you to put it to its alternate. Okay, take some time, reverse those few. Okay. Okay, so these now give us an idea of where you fall on the extroversion to introversion, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally stable, and openness to new experiences standards. So based on those, with those reverse scored items in there also, where you fall along those scales. Okay, add your scores for each area that's shown. I have the scores down here, and compute the average for each. So take the scores, divide them by 2, and have it here for you. Do this for yourself, so you're scoring yourself on each one. And then I want you to interpret this on kind of a sliding scale. Okay, so if you were less than or equal to 3.1, you fall below. You fall lower on that scale, that's more towards the extroversion. If you were higher on that scale, more introversion, and so on and so forth. Okay, so feel how that flows you along those points. You may learn something about yourself. And then we got to look at states. States are situation or environment specific. Okay, so they change more than those traits. Um, so they're very short term, they're very situation and environment specific. Okay, those states can change in an instant based on behaviors, based on arousal level or anxiety levels, your nervousness, the situation where you're in, if it's a high stakes situation, low stakes, um, somewhere familiar, somewhere that's not familiar. So we have to understand that these are very specific to times and locations or environments and situations. Okay, so we can have general trait and state measures, okay, like our TPI. That was a general trait measure, but we can also have some more specific ones that put us into situations. But the best way to measure these is within that state. So we have to get that person within that state in order to accurately and reliably get that information. Okay, so we would have to take these at the specific time in which they are in the state or in the environment or situation where we want to measure their specific state. Um, so this is how you're feeling. Okay, would be a general one. So how are you feeling? Energetic, fatigued, full of pep, annoyed, confused. Okay, indicate how you've been feeling. Not at all, quite a bit, a little, extremely, moderately. So these are all the scores and we would put them through. And this gives us a mood state general view over the past week. So this would be very general. Rather than using this at a very specific time point, how are you feeling right now? I use these mood state kind of general questionnaires with my athletes. So I ask them, how are you feeling today? How have you been feeling this week? I'll use more open-ended questions if I see that they're answering ones that are more fatigued, tense, worn out. Then I know that, hey, maybe they're not in the state where we can push them really hard. Or if they're in states where like, I feel great, hey, this is awesome. I use these kind of questionnaires regularly as subjective answers for my athletes to understand how I can best work with them on one specific day. And then if I see that they have ones that are consistent, so if they're chronically, so over the last 2 weeks, they're saying, oh, I'm fatigued, I'm feeling beat up, things are wearing me out. I know that maybe it's time to back off with them and give them some more recovery compared to ones that are like, oh, okay, I'm ready to go. Okay, I feel fine, I feel great. Let's go, let's go, let's go. You can kind of take that information and use it to, on the fly, alter someone's training or practice within their sport. Okay. We can also measure these things through qualitative and quantitative methods. So qualitative would be based on interviews and observations, and quantitative we would use some kind of Likert or semantic differential, some kind of numeric scoring system. So for qualitative measures, we would use an observation or an interview, watching them in a natural setting, but it does rely on someone's perception of what's going on. So this is what I just talked about, talking to maybe my athletes. How are you feeling today? How did that repetition feel? What were you thinking about on this situation? Do you feel confident right now? Things like that. Those, and also watching how they're moving, what they're doing. Say, okay, things are looking different today than they normally look. They're looking worse. How are you feeling? What feels weird? Does anything feel off? Okay, what else is going on in life? Did you have other stressors? Things like that can give me a qualitative overview of the athlete's standing, and then can tell me, okay, I probably should back off or I should do something else. I can also use quantitative methods or numerical methods. I often use a Likert scale, which is a 1 to 5 scale, as a very numerical and objective kind of quantitative measure that allows me to see how my athletes are doing, and I can look at that over time to see if there are major changes. So these are often things like sometimes, often, frequently, always, strongly agree, to disagree, always to never, agree to disagree. They can be longer scales or shorter scales, but these are scaled responses. A Likert scale is normally 5 or 7 points and assumes that there's an equal difference between each interval based on the response. So like never, sometimes, often, frequently, always. So there's an equal distance between each one. There's no half points. I use a Likert scale like this for my athletes when we're looking at readiness. I use a 5-question questionnaire, and then their average score from that questionnaire tells me their perceived readiness. So I use things like sleep, mood, energy, soreness, and then they have a scale of 1 to it's really bad to 5, there's no soreness at all, or I had great sleep, things like that. If their readiness is below a 4, below a 3 for some athletes, I know, hey, we need to back off this day. Or if it's above a 4 or closer to a 5, I know, hey, we can push this day because I have an objective scale. And if I see that over time, hey, maybe my athlete starts out and all their readiness are 4, 4, 4, 4, and then 1 week it's all down to the 2s. And that's something that I can use as information as the coach to come up to my athlete, hey, what's been going on? Your readiness has been really low. And then they tell me something like, oh, I haven't been sleeping well. Oh, I've been in a bad mood. There's stuff going on with my family. Things like that can help me better interact with my athletes and have a better conversation to improve them as an overall person and give them what they need. And we can also use different scales like a semantic differential. So these are think of polar opposites, and we're trying to find where on this scale you fall from term to term. Okay, from hot to cold would be an example. From strong to weak. How do you feel today on a scale of from strong to weak? Where do you feel? Strong might be 10 and weak might be 1 if you wanted to use numbers through there. Decisive, indecisive. How do you feel on a scale of good to bad? Okay, right in the middle. Cheap, how is that? Cheap to expensive, where does it fall? Passive to active, where does that fall? Lazy to industrious, where do you fall? One of the really big things here is that the athlete or the person you're working with has to understand those terms. So if you're working with a language barrier, these may not be the best scales to use because they may not be interpreting your word the same way that you're interpreting the word. So make sure that they understand what you mean by decisive and indecisive. You may have to use analogies or other examples, or you need to use a different scale or a different measurement because that one doesn't work best. If they don't understand, it does not work at all. You can use other ones like, how does that feel from pleasant to unpleasant, from hurt to not hurt, from feel good to pain, from good to bad, to useful to useless. So you can use this sliding scale of descriptive terms, and you can use that same 7-point scale, average them out, and you can get a good general idea. So here's one for physical activity. So your attitude towards physical activity. So when I say physical activity, what do you think on a scale of good to bad? And mark along that scale from thinking it's pleasant to unpleasant, relaxed to tense, hot to cold, healthy to unhealthy, nice to awful, delicate to rugged, active to passive. And I know that maybe if they're closer to one side or closer to the other, that they maybe enjoy or don't enjoy, or maybe you can find some pieces from there that tell them, okay, this person doesn't like physical activity because they see it as rugged and cold. They don't understand, they don't like those pieces. So maybe you can change the type of physical activity that you give them so that they maybe feel it in a more pleasant or more relaxed state, or make them feel that it is more nice for them because now they like it. Things like that. You can use that information for yourself to improve their experience. Okay, so now let's look at some different measurements that we may use a little bit more rather than just the scales like a Likert scale. What are the measurements that we need within sport and exercise psychology? The first one we really talk about is stress and anxiety. Okay, stress is defined as a substantial imbalance between physical and psychological demand and response capability under conditions where failure to meet the demand has important consequences. So this is where we get this type of think about butterflies in your stomach, or where you're nervous. This can also go along with anxiety, which is the negative emotional state that is involved with worry and this stress response. If anxiety comes in during stress, that's a negative emotional state. Some people, they respond to stress extremely well. They find it as motivating. Some find it as anxious and negative, which can lead to different perceptions of that situation. Motivation refers to the direction and intensity of one's effort. Okay, so how you attack a game, your intensity, your effort within a situation comes from your motivation. Okay, so if winning is what motivates you and you're getting close to winning, how does that make you feel? Or you're losing and you want to win, what does that make you feel? Or if you hate losing, you're trying to direct your effort so that you don't lose. Things like that. Or ideas of your motivation, how important you find that situation. And we can measure these different pieces, or other pieces that we might measure, like anxiety. We can also measure attention, especially in focus-driven sports. Attitude towards exercise and physical activity is huge in exercise psychology. So how do you feel about this type of movement? Body image may play a role in both fitness related or exercise psychology related, and also within sports, because body image does play a role in some sports. Where having a more aesthetically pleasing body image based on a standard is important, and having that body image can hinder or impact your performance. Then there's confidence within the sport and motivation. So these are the major points that we need to look at within exercise and sport psychology to improve the experience of our clients or our athletes. So we could use some different types of scales or tests, like the sport competition anxiety scale, attitudes towards physical activity, children's attitude towards physical activity, perceived confidence, and trait and state sport confidence inventories. These are all example scales that are used to measure these psychological traits and states. So our competitive state inventory looks at, I feel at ease in this situation. I feel comfortable. My body feels tense. I feel self-confident. This can tell you within that situation how that athlete feels. And we can look at perceived confidence. I feel confident in my ability to play this game. I feel confident, or I feel capable of playing this game. I am able to play this game. I feel able to meet the challenges. This can show your perceived confidence, especially with maybe you're working with younger children. Maybe you're working with people who are new to a sport. Understanding where their perceived confidence is, their perceived competence is, can tell you how to interact with them. So if they don't feel confident or competent within the sport, maybe you need to create situations that can improve their competence, so skill drills, and make them successful so they become confident and feel competent, so now they can go into the sport. So especially working with youth athletics, the more competent the athlete is, the more confident they normally are. So improving competency within the sport can improve confidence overall. All right, lastly, I have a little activity for you to do on your own. Unfortunately, we can't do them together. I want you to look at how can you utilize psychological measurement to evaluate your client, athlete, patient, or whoever you work with within your realm. So if you want to be a physical therapist, an athletic trainer, if you want to be a sport coach, a physical education teacher, how can you utilize a psychological measurement with your students, athletes, clients, patients, and so on? How could you benefit your teaching, coaching, rehab, your profession, so on and so forth, by including these measurements? What could they give you that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise? And lastly, what are some limitations that come with psychological measurements? So think about this and how they are self-perceived, how that person feels. So what subjective and objective pieces fall in that may give some limitations to psychological measurements. All right, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in our next video.